All-rounders become mythical figures in cricket. The ultimate, you had to be their player. I often talk about the Botham Pringle continuum. You are either a hero or a joke. And the interesting thing about Jadeja is that he has been both in his career, often at the same time. What all-rounders do can't just be seen by their batting or bowling averages. They stretch the team. They give you extra batters and bowlers. They turned 11 into 12. It's an incredible feat. And it's why we talk about them so much, even when sometimes you look at their numbers and they don't seem that sexy. There was never a middle ground with Ravi Jadeja. People either still see him as Dhoni's puppet, the joke, Ashwin Light, bits and pieces, or they see him as pretty much the greatest player who can do no wrong. Even for an all-rounder, he's far more divisive than others. But over the last few years, it would be hard to argue that he hasn't been one of the best players in the world. You probably won't remember Jadeja's performance from the Oval Test in 2021. It's certainly not one of his most iconic games. He was sent into bat at number 5 in both innings, so there was a left-hand, right-hand balance at the crease. While he didn't score many runs, he spent some time out there and built useful partnerships with Virat in both knocks. He bowled an exceptional defensive spell in the 4th innings, used the rough to get the ball to cause problems for the left-handers, returned with the figures of 2 for 50 in 30 overs on a pitch with no real help for the spinners. So let's just break all that down for a moment. His batting is so flexible that he can basically bat anywhere from 5 to number 8. He can be attacking or defensive with the ball, and we also know for a spinner he can also take the new ball. And when he bats at 5, that means India has legitimate 7 batters and 5 bowlers in their lineup. Forget the early memes, although some were very funny. This is a player who even just in a run-of-the-mill performance from him makes an impact because of how many different roles he can play. But the oval performance is not what Ravi Jadeja is remembered for. It is for never being dismissed and taking a lot of wickets. But how about this? What if the man we all laughed at is the most valuable player in the world right now? Like if we were to draft an 11 that is equipped across all conditions and wasn't age dependent or anything else. We know that Ravi Jadeja would make the cut. I'm not even sure that's really a conversation at this point. But what might be is what number he would go. Is he as valuable as the likes of Steve Smith, Ben Stokes, Pat Cummins, and Ravichandran Ashwin? Because there is a chance that right now, Jadeja is the most valuable player in world cricket. 2018 was the start of the fast bowling era of modern day test cricket. It suddenly felt like everyone had deeper bowling attacks and the wickets were tougher to bat on. Obviously the wobble ball and then the kookaburra actually being reinforced made a huge difference here. But test cricket became a lot more result orientated. Despite scoring 3 first-class triple hundreds when he was still basically an infant, Jadeja was always considered a bowler who could bat a little bit for the first half of his international career. However, there was a meteoric shift in his batting prowess since 2018. Among the 58 batters with over 1,000 runs in that period, Ravi Jadeja has the 13th highest average in Test cricket. Yeah. What's interesting to note is that the global batting average has been at an all-time low in that period. So he started making runs just when everyone else stopped. And he's not even a specialist. Although most batters in the world would probably love to have his record. And perhaps it's not fair to compare a lower order middle batter with top order, especially in an era when the top have struggled so much with that wobble seam delivery. So let's just have a look at his batting averages for the positions 5 to 7. You can see that he's still just very high up. And he's the only player here who is a genuine frontline bowling option. Ravi Shastri said that Jadeja now has self-belief. And this is something you see with a lot of athletes. People tell them how good they are, but sometimes it just doesn't click until they work out how good they are. So when you go to the bowlers, Jadeja has the 7th best bowling average amongst the 26 bowlers with at least 25 wickets in this period. And remember what I said before, this is a seam era. And of course he has had incredible help at home, but it would be hard to argue that he has been the 2nd best spin bowler in the world by a fair margin. And you may think, oh, he's only good enough to pick up wickets in Asian conditions. So let's have a look at his record away from home. You can see that he's outbowled the likes of Ashwin and Lyon in these conditions, even when they have played in the same matches. The one interesting thing is that his bowling workload is slightly less than Ashwin away from home, which might mean that he's bowling more towards the end of the game when it's better for spinners. But the difference isn't even that big because Jadeja bowls 17 overs per innings on average in this time period, while Ashwin has bowled 20 overs per innings. And while his bowling is not as good away from home, his batting still holds up pretty well. Jadeja has become an integral part of India's batting on the road. I mean, since 2018, he's just an elite batter home and away for India. I mean, the 4th highest away average amongst India's with 500 plus runs since 2018. And look at some of the names below him on this list. We know that at times he has carried the batting from number 7, so much so that they've obviously tried him higher up the list. There's not much there that you wouldn't know already. But that just leads us to the question. Is he the best all-rounder in the world? A positive all-round differential is considered to be good if you are elite at one skill. It can be a flawed metric depending on how you look at it sometimes, but for high usage bowling all-rounders, it works much better. And so a difference of above 20 is simply incredible. And he is the only player who is doing this in the world at the moment. A few years back, Shakib Al Hasan would have been pretty handy as well. But I'm not sure he ever had a differential like this for 5 years. And of course, of recent times, he's missed a lot of tests because of suspension and also because of him not wanting to play test cricket as much. There are many different ways to frame what Jadeja is as a player, but he's essentially a top 6 or 7 batter, the second choice spinner behind the best spinner in the world at home, and he solves the 5th bowler problem when India tours. And we know that for a while, India had persisted with Hardik Pandya, but he wasn't anywhere near as effective as Jadeja was. But I just want to focus on something I said a moment ago, that he can bat in the top 6 or number 7. Because when you're talking about all-rounders, there is a massive difference between where you end up in the order. At number 8, you lengthen the batting a little bit and give your team a solid start to the tail, but no extra bowler. If you're batting at number 7, that's an in-between position. If your team has a wicketkeeper good enough to bat in the top 6, you can help provide an extra bowler, but you are reliant on another player. And if you just look at the other high-performing all-rounders that we said before, Jason Holder really can't bat in the top 6, but he probably can bat at number 7. And he is definitely a frontline bowler. Ashwin is a number 8 who can probably moonlight at number 7, but not there permanently. Ben Stokes can bat in the top 6, but while he has frontline bowling talent, his body just doesn't really allow for bowling the overs of a specialist. The only player in cricket who can bat and bowl in frontline spots right now is Ravi Jadeja. And as you often find with all-rounders, he's an incredible fielder. He's definitely one of the best outfielders in the world. However, we are talking about test cricket, and Stokes and Holder are in the slips and are just more useful in that format. And I don't think Ashwin really needs to be in this conversation. So while Jadeja's fielding is not as important, it's still another plus for him. However, if we're going to find one negative, I would say that it is availability. Being the most valuable player in the team is about keeping yourself out there as much as possible. So we've done an analysis of Jadeja with the other high-performing all-rounders, just to see how many games they have missed in this period compared to him. This is a really high number, especially when you consider that he's far higher than the 2 guys who bowl seam. While Jadeja is an incredible athlete, he does just miss a lot of cricket. And I think that has to factor against his case. However, when they play, Stokes barely has half the workload of Jadeja with the ball, and even less so once he's become full-time captain. He has barely been a 2-wicket per test bowler of late, and with his knee injury at the moment, you're only going to assume he's going to bowl even fewer balls. But there's one other metric that I've talked about a few times, especially when we're talking about all-rounders: balls per match. Basically looking at players' usage load. And for this, we've compared him to his peers and also the best all-rounders of all time. We can only do modern players though, because we don't have the full stats for some of the older players. But on a balls per match basis, Jadeja is 3rd behind Ashwin and Shakib. He's involved in more balls per game than Pollock, Callis and Cairns. He has high usage with bat and ball. And it doesn't always feel that way because there are certainly games on the road where he doesn't bowl that much. But I suppose he makes that up for basically being half of India's attack when he gets home. So he's high usage, but he's also very effective. That's a hell of a combo. And so while you might still pick Stokes above Jadeja, especially when factoring in captaincy and perhaps even the slips fielding, it would be impossible to say that he's more valuable in terms of productivity and results than Jadeja. You might want Stokes for the vibes, or as pace bowling all-rounders often give you more flexibility. But Jadeja is a production monster when fit, and to have an average differential like he does is insane. So the only reason you would pick one of the other all-rounders over him is because he isn't fit enough. And yet, there was a time when Jadeja was not even a certainty to play for India. He was left out of India's first 4 test matches versus England in 2018. That isn't the case for Stokes, who's been pretty much automatic from the beginning, but from the point of which this version of Jadeja emerges. He has just been an incredible cricketer, producing the kinds of numbers that few ever have. He's now approaching a batting average of 40 with a bowling average under 30. Here is the full list of all the players in the history of cricket with 50 wickets and 1,000 runs with a batting average over 40 and a bowling average under 30. If Jadeja manages to get to this mark, he would probably have more than 3,000 runs and 300 wickets as well. We have simply never seen anyone produce like this before. I think like many all-rounders, he came in a bit early, was green, made some silly decisions, but his last 5 years are up there with the best of Imran Khan, Jacques Kallis and Garfield Sobers. That's the top of the tree right there. And I don't compare anyone to Imran, and yet Jadeja is moving into that conversation. Since 2018, he is the best all-rounder in tests. I think that conversation has completely ended. But the question here wasn't if he's the best all-rounder, but if he's the most valuable player in the world. And that means we also have to compare him to the best specialist guys. If we are looking at batting, the obvious choices are Smith, Root, Williamson, Rohit, Bubba, and Labuschagne. All of these players are making a lot of runs considering that this is a pace-playing pandemic. Williamson averages 59, and that is the most. And you could argue that that is boosted by incredible feats against very poor attacks, because he has struggled against the best teams in that time. But even if you don't mention that, he's still not averaging that much more than Jadeja. Now, of course, you can factor in that one bats at the top and one bats in the middle, and that's very fair. But if you're thinking about that, you also have to remember that because of Jadeja's batting, it means that India can go in with 5 bowlers. And as good as Williamson is, he isn't worth 2 batters at the moment. Labuschagne might actually be the best specialist batter, especially if you're adjusting for the Pakistani pitches that Bubba has been batting on. But again, they're not that far away from Jadeja. Certainly not far enough away that they overcome for his bowling. So, what about the bowlers? Cummins, Anderson, Ashwin, Bumrah, Rabada, those are the obvious best bowlers in the world. I would say that Cummins has been the pick of all of them in this period, partly because Anderson doesn't take quite as many wickets, Bumrah just hasn't played as much, and Rabada's average isn't quite as good as Cummins. But this is a fast bowling era, so their numbers are a little lower than they probably deserve to be. But you know what this isn't? A spinners era. But there's no doubt that Ashwin's numbers are completely propped up by the fact that he's playing in India. But if we take all of those guys as the best bowlers, and the exact same is true of Jadeja. But look how high his name comes up on this list. I mean, we are looking at the best bowlers in cricket, and he's a fringe contender for that title. Oh, and if you go back to the batting, one player I didn't mention was Root, who has 1,600 since the start of 2018. He has been magnificent, and he's not that far ahead on the list than Jadeja, because he only averages 3 more than him. I mean, what? So you have the list of the best players in the world at batting and bowling. And Jadeja is top 10 and top 15 in both disciplines. Let's round the batting down a little bit because he does bat in the middle order. Let's say he's only the 20th or 25th best batter, but he's still probably the 7th best bowler and clearly the 2nd best spinner. Not to mention probably top 5 in test outfielders as well. I mean, you might still pick another player that we have mentioned so far over him. You might just like one of those players better. They might just be more natural goats. That they might be of more use home and away than Jadeja sometimes feels. I mean, the thing about Jadeja is he's the 2nd best spinner in his side. I can understand why you're still looking for someone else. Not to mention that you probably grew up with him as this sort of weird little boy of cricket and all the first-class triple hundreds that didn't translate to test straight away, or the bits and pieces thing, or all the different things that you could be doing. Not to mention just conflating his worth with what he does in white ball cricket. Because even I am not positive he's the best cricketer in the world right now. However, if you are looking for the most valuable player in tests in that last 5 years, well, I don't know what to tell you, but I'm pretty sure that it has to be Ravi Jadeja.